Greetings and welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 10 Grand Finale episode. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We are coming to you live here in New York City on the stage of CommerceNext Growth Show in front of a live audience. Let's hear it, everybody. All right. Fantastic, an enthusiastic crowd. Our special guest on this episode is Joe Kudla, visionary founder and CEO of Vuori. Vuori makes premium performance apparel inspired by the active coastal California lifestyle, integration of fitness, surf, sport, and they're evolving a definition of traditional activewear. Now, your interview, Steve, was on the stage live at CommerceNext, closing the show. But it's not Joe's first time on our podcast.
It is not.
When we talked to Joe, I think it was like 4 years ago, it was just a fantastic specialty retailer, but the growth behind it has been just amazing.
Yeah, we got connected to Joe through a former colleague of mine at Neiman Marcus Group who's on their board, and I knew a little bit about the brand and was getting a lot of buzz, and it was great to get him on and hear about the vision. But since then, they have opened 80 stores, I think it is. They've expanded to London, several other international markets. So the brand is just on fire. He's a really, really interesting guy. So I think people really love hearing the story if they don't know it and getting the update.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, as this is our season finale, we're doing something a little bit different as opposed to covering the news of the week. We wanted to kind of look back on season 10, which started at the beginning of 2025, and then look forward. So the looking back part is thinking about what were the key stories, what are the major stories for retailers that we thought about, and then looking forward. And it's not a predictions episode. We've got those, and we're going to update the prediction episode when we come back to our full episode, season 11, which starts in very early September 2nd. So, all right, let's get into it. Now, looking back at our season, like I said, we started at the big show in January, and it's not terribly hard to guess what would be your number one thing that's happened, and it probably starts with a T.
Yeah. Maybe a little alliteration: tariff turbulence or tariff turmoil. So, yeah, this is pretty obvious, and we've talked about it so much, and I'm sure folks are talking about it, so I don't know that there's a lot to say other than the chaos and uncertainty that was wrought starting several months ago really continues. I don't know that it's gotten appreciably better. We don't really know, many people listening would probably know that July 9th is the date that the extension is coming up, and the Trump administration has promised 90 deals in 90 days. We are at day 79, and there has been, let's say, 0.8 deals, to be charitable about the deal with the UK. So I don't think they're going to hit their number. They have not obliterated their plan.
What do we say is we're project managers, nothing motivates like a deadline, though. So it could be a flurry of activity.
It could be, but I think it's like 5.2 a day or something like that, which seems like a pretty active pace. My guess is the deadline will get pushed out. But anyway, the point of all this is that there isn't a ton of clarity about what the go-forward tariff situation looks like yet. How quickly that will happen, really, who knows? The other thing which I think also probably most people seem to understand, though I do see different stories about it, is very little of the tariff impact in terms of pricing or impact on profit margins will have hit. That is starting to happen, but I think we'll really start to see that in July and August.
And some of that we think is the front loading of inventory that started actually this time last year in anticipation of something.
Right.
So some of that is just delayed, and some of it is, I think, what I've been hearing here in the hallways is retailers trying to figure out this: who pays, the vendor, the customer, me? Do I take the hit in the margin? Do I want to talk about it at all? Nobody wants to talk about it. Clue there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, obviously a lot more to come, but that seems to have kind of consumed a lot of the conversation in retail for the past 6 months now, almost.
Now, one of the things we've looked at over the years, I mean, 11 seasons, we're going to 11 seasons together, is store openings, store closings.
Right.
And there's always that kind of narrative. And I guess our journey together started about, our mutual dissatisfaction with the whole narrative of the retail apocalypse. But when you look at the store opening, store closing number for 2025, there's some math there that's actually working out to be net negative, right?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I think the numbers year to date is that, last year was a pretty high store closing number. Also, lots of store openings, to be fair. So far, store closings have almost tripled over last year, and several folks have predicted easily the biggest record year of store closings. And I think some people have blamed tariffs. I think that's a little bit of an excuse. I mean, a lot of this is really what we've seen, and I talk about in my book, which I call the collapse in the middle, is that these companies that really don't have a workable business model are trying to find ways to survive. They can't figure out how to get the top line going, so not the easiest thing, but a common thing to do is to close stores. Now, what I think will be particularly interesting as the year goes on is if we do see a lot of slowdown in consumer spending, interest rates continue to be high, all the pressures from companies absorbing tariffs could push this even further.
Yeah. And there's some big tranches of stores in there. We should point out the drugstore category, particularly the
there
dollar
were,
store category.
Right.
Like if you add up the numbers, there's some big numbers just in those two categories.
Absolutely. And
for their own dynamics.
And they're probably, not to get too inside baseball on this, but there tend not to be as many store closings in general the second half of the year, because it's like if you make it to the fall and the holidays, you're probably going to go through, and then you see big store closings after they kind of
at least get rid of your inventory for the rest of the year, and that February kind of deadline comes up. Let's talk about the other side where there's growth, because sir, our friend Jason Goldberg,
very close friend,
he talks about this fun chart where he says, if you take on averages, Tibet is flat.
Right.
And on average, we're seeing retail growth in the kind of 3%. But when you go one level below, you're seeing a slightly different and more interesting story. Talk about it.
Yeah, I don't think this gets enough attention. We've talked about this fact on the podcast a few times, so I'll make it brief. But if you look at the incremental growth in retail, over 50% of it is accounted for by 3 retailers in the United States: Amazon, Walmart, and Costco. And then if you add TJX, Temu, and Shein, you get to, I forget the exact number, but it's like 66%. And it's actually getting more concentrated.
Not less.
Less. And there's some, again, who knows, but there's some sense that this could even accelerate more with the tariff situation, because with inflation, people may be even more value-oriented. Obviously, those are very value-oriented retailers. And the big players have the ability to absorb the cost increases more, have negotiating power with it. So really, when you think about that, and you also say, okay, well, there's some small retailers like Vuori, like Abercrombie and Fitch. We can point to a number of smaller retailers that are putting up double-digit numbers.
Yeah.
It's really like, well, the vast majority of retailers are either flat or negative. And I think the potential implications, if that persists, are quite significant, and that does help explain the store closing number as well.
Connected to that, and the one thing that we've shared that kind of surprised us is the state of Walmart versus Target and the state of Target's performance. Did that surprise you, or would you call that out as something notable for the season?
Well, if you haven't followed this, Walmart, it's just amazing really how successful Walmart has been over the last few years. Think about their size, and they've been very consistently posting increases in profit, very solid growth, far above average sales growth. At the same time, Target has had negative comp store sales. Now, they are not exactly the same business model.
Yeah.
Walmart in particular is much, much stronger in grocery. But a lot of it has to, and some people point to their DEI position, which I think absolutely hasn't helped them, but it's more than that.
That's a bit of a red herring,
a little bit. It's a contributor, but a lot of it has to do with poor execution. So if you think about just how, in some ways, similar they are, to see like an 8-point spread in store sales, as well as their profitability has not been that great. So I think it's going to be interesting to see whether they can right the ship there.
And Walmart's recent numbers and their growth in apparel was particularly enlightening, because that's not been a particularly strong category for them historically, and it's been strong for Target. So, that's kind of an interesting twist. Let's talk about AI. We seem to always need to, I can't imagine it wouldn't be on your list of interesting things, but it continues to evolve fast and even faster. We're hearing some of that here.
Well, yeah, with our live audience here, I imagine a number of people were in sessions where the discussion was not only about AI or generative AI, it was about agentic AI. And it's interesting to me, just in general, with many technologies, where you don't hear much. It just kind of speaks to the pace of change. Certain technologies, you don't hear much about, and then all of a sudden, it's all you talk about. Now, sometimes it's the metaverse, and then the metaverse is gone. In other cases, it's generative AI, which seems to have more persistence, and now it's agentic AI. And from what I'm hearing, talking to clients and just talking to people in the industry, this is moving so quickly that it's hard to know where it's going to end up. But you think about how that can redefine search, you think about how that can redefine distribution. Like, why can't you bypass retailers to go directly to the product manufacturer? So I don't know that I'm quite ready to say it's this big paradigm shift, but I feel like we're edging much, much closer to that.
Well, how did I hear it phrased a couple of times, that you need to build authority with, or even agency with AI, so that they choose these agentic shopping agents will choose you versus someone else, and the complexity just starts to spiral. So my head's a bit spinny, but it gives us great things to talk about for season 11. Yeah. Speaking of looking forward, let's take a step and think about what you're looking forward for and looking at for the rest of the summer and for the rest of the year. What's on your mind?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think from the macroeconomic perspective, whether or not we actually get what's called stagflation. Many of you probably know what that's about. If you don't, it's just basically very low growth at the same time inflation occurs. And that's generally not what happens, or it doesn't happen for any length of time. And I think there's a lot of fear because, not just because of the tariffs, but largely because of the tariffs. We'll see what happens in the Middle East in terms of oil prices. If oil prices were to go up a lot, that would cause inflation, a bunch of labor dynamics, which maybe we'll talk about in a second. So the possibility of a significant increase in inflation, which has been pretty tame and improving really for some time now. So it's not evident that that's going to happen, but it seems like it's right around the corner. And at the same time, growth is starting to slow. So whether or not growth will really slow down a lot and inflation will tick up, I mean, if that happens, that's obviously very negative for retail.
We have a new franchise in the podcast called The Analysts, and in our last episode we asked the analysts, particularly Neil Saunders, how he and what he was hearing about how retailers are going to deal with potentially increased costs from tariffs, and put that up against a consumer that is very, very unwilling to take a price increase. Yeah. You must be thinking about how to square that circle a little bit from our members.
Well, again, it remains to be seen. I mean, I do think from both that conversation as well as talking to other people, clients and whatnot, the general feeling is that most consumers are not in a place to really accept much in the way of price increases. So the alternatives there really are that the manufacturers, the retailers, eat the cost. And I try not to make any kind of stock market predictions, but it's very hard for me to figure out why everybody's so excited, why the stock market is doing so well, when I think it's going to be very true that a number of companies are going to have their earnings really, really hit unless they can pass most of it on to the consumer. And I just don't see that happening writ large. I mean, it's going to happen in certain particular, Hermes, some very high-end brands, I think have a lot of pricing power. But I don't think Macy's, Target has a ton of pricing power. So I don't know. I just think that's going to be something that'll be really interesting.
Let's talk about labor for a second. Watching what's happening in some sectors, which is they have a lot of laborers that are non-registered Americans, and they're being raided, and now they're not showing up to pick the lettuce, and to work in the plants. They're being arrested at Home Depot. Right. So this has got to have some kind of impact on the front lines of both the manufacturers and providers, and to some degree, the retail industry writ large.
Well, there's both I think a labor and a consumer impact. As most people would know, unemployment's been pretty low in the United States for a number of years now, starting to tick up, and you see some of that because of some layoffs and things like that. I'm actually more worried about labor shortages in many respects for exactly this, because there is a very large percentage of undocumented people in retail, in hospitality, in the building industries. We have a shortage of housing in the United States. So you just start to think about where there could be product shortages, service issues, as well as just people not being able to hire or having to pay a lot more. So this also could
they can find the people
to pay a lot more.
So which in the fullness of time may happen. People might take a different, okay, I will be a roofer because now I'll get a good wage, but it's not going to happen this year.
Right. So I just think there are a lot of pressures. And again, what I would say, both from a tariff perspective as well as the immigration policy and some other things, is we haven't really seen this fully play out. We've seen a little bit of the trends changing. We've seen kind of these signals, but it's certainly not happening on a large scale. Really, will it? I think generally it will, but there's lots of reasons to think, well, maybe it's not going to be quite so bad. So I try to be a little bit more upbeat.
Talk about luxury, because the luxury has been moving along, and it's just a powerful engine, but it seems to have hit a few speed bumps in the road.
Yeah, I'm watching our time, so I'll just hit the last two things I wanted to mention really quickly. I've worked in the luxury industry in Neiman Marcus for a number of years, and one of the things that was true was luxury just seemed to always grow. I mean, there might be a little bit of a dip like post the financial crisis, but luxury just kept growing, growing, and growing. 15 straight really great years. Bain is predicting that this will be the first time in 15 years the luxury market will contract, and they're predicting 3 to 5%. If we actually look at year to date, those numbers look like a pretty good prediction. And number one, the industry, whether we're talking about the vendors or the retailers, they're not just used to this. They're used to being able to raise prices and it growing, and growth covers a lot.
Open beautiful stores.
Open beautiful stores, et cetera. Yeah. So, if this contraction really continues, and we've already got a few of the big luxury players like Kering that have had pretty rough times, the Saks Neiman's mergers, and pretty difficult position. What will be the fallout from this? And I think you may see more store closings. I mean, we just generally have not seen store closings when it comes to the luxury market. Now,
we should probably end on department stores. So we often talk about it perhaps too much, but I don't think so. It's a pretty major part of retail, but declining every day. What are you looking for in that sector?
Well, I'll combine it in general in kind of a group of turnarounds. There's a bunch of turnarounds going on right now. Some of them have been worked on for years, it seems like, but Macy's, Kohl's, Penny's, trying to turn around Victoria's Secret. And most of these just don't seem to be gaining a lot of traction. The other one is Target. We talked a little bit about Gap, which did seem like it's getting some traction. So I'll be looking to see, is there really any progress? But the tariff situation complicates this a lot because everybody I mentioned has a pretty high percent, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but a very large percentage of imported products. So minimally, they're getting hit with 10%, but there's definitely product from China at a higher tariff rate. So it's the turnarounds. I think I would have gone into the year saying, well, I pretty much did say, going into the year, these turnarounds are not layups, that there's a lot of work to happen. The tariff situation, the possible slowdown in the economy just complicates things, unfortunately. So hopefully people will be able to figure some things out and just navigate their way through what is hopefully not too difficult a period.
All right, well, that's a wrap on Season 10. A great way to end this session. Let's get now in the episode to your great interview with Joe Kudla from Vuori, and be sure and tune in, everyone who's listening, everybody in the room, to our summer bonus series recorded here in New York City at CommerceNext. Let's hear from the live crowd before we go. All right, thank you. And now we're here with you and Joe Kudla, so thanks.
Our final show keynote is a trailblazing entrepreneur in the performance apparel category. Joe Kudla launched Vuori a decade ago, right around the height of the athleisure boom. In his early days, Vuori was just months away from shuttering. Guided by customer feedback, Joe successfully overhauled the brand's marketing efforts, eventually leading Vuori to become a household name. Last year, Vuori received private equity investment that valued the business at $5.5 billion. Today, in conversation with Steve Dennis, host of the Remarkable Retail podcast, Joe will discuss how Vuori is blending digital, physical, and community. Please join me in welcoming Joe and Steve to the stage.
All right, these are the real warriors staying here to the end. You're not going to be disappointed. This is going to be a great conversation. Two really quick things before we dive in. One is we are recording this interview for the Remarkable Retail podcast, so you don't need to take notes. You can listen to that later. And also, as a little special gift, copies of my book, Remarkable Retail, are available as you leave. But let's get to the reason we're here. Joe Kudla. Joe, how are you today?
Doing good, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Well, start, I guess, where we must, which is tell us a little bit about Vuori, particularly. I think the origin story of the brand is particularly interesting, and then we'll flash forward a little bit.
Yeah. So Vuori launched in the spring of 2015, and it was really an extension of all the things that I love about being alive: fitness, exploring, adventure, mindfulness, connecting to nature, being in and out of the ocean. It was very much inspired by our community. I live in a little beach town called Encinitas. Quick show of hands, who's been to Encinitas, California? Okay. It's a beautiful town. It's home to a lot of professional surfers, triathletes, young families, creatives. And so we looked at this place and we were like, this is like the perfect inspiration for a brand. And my personal journey, I had hurt my back playing sports growing up, and a friend suggested I try yoga. I got into yoga practice, and I asked the question, like, what does a guy wear to yoga? And there just weren't a lot of options. If you think about the marketplace that we were in, studio fitness was exploding, yoga was exploding. There were 30 million people practicing yoga, and 30% of them were men, and they didn't have a brand. And then you think about, there was, in 2015, there were about 30 million or so men that were between the ages of 30 and 45, and about 50% of men in the US played sports growing up and exercised regularly. So that's a big audience of people that, in my opinion, didn't really have a lifestyle brand to hitch their wagon to. You had the big sporting goods brands, that were really footwear dominant. Their clothing really identified you as somebody to compete in somebody who was on their way to compete in a sport or go to the gym. And we were looking for a brand that more effortlessly would merge with our community in Encinitas. Like, it was more subtle. The fabrics were really soft. The color story was a little bit more muted and like kissed by the sun. And it was product that would both support you in a great workout, but also as product that you didn't feel like you needed to rush home and change out of. That was very much present in the women's market, but it didn't exist for men's. And so that's what we set out to create.
So I guess a couple follow-on questions there. One, maybe a little bit about the evolution, because a lot has happened since your sort of humble beginnings, but also the activewear world. I don't know if you like that moniker, but is pretty crowded. So aside from the particular Southern California inspiration and being men-focused, how have you crafted the differentiation as the brand has grown?
I mean, it's such a good question. This is one of the favorite questions that like retail analysts like to ask us. It's like, well, what's the difference between Vuori and Lululemon? And the truth is, like, we both compete in the space, and there's distribution differences, there's brand differences, which Steve just pointed out. Vuori is very much born on the beach, and then there's product difference. And maybe it takes a product, a designer's eye to understand what those differences are, but to us, they're very clear. Vuori was born as a men's brand first. When my wife took me into my first Lululemon store, I was like, where's the men's product? And it was like over there in the corner. It didn't feel like an experience for me. So we built a brand for men first. Today, our business is 50-50 men's and women's. But at that point in time, we led very much with men's because we felt like it was an underserved market. For us, it's all about product. To have a business that breaks through in retail, you have to do so many things right. You have to execute well. You have to have great, compelling marketing. You have to build a great culture. But the most important thing is product is king, product is queen, it's everything. So at Vuori, we are really known for being fabric-led. And you could argue that Lulu is too, but our fabrics are very unique. And so for people that wear Vuori, they understand what I'm talking about. We had to spend a lot of time to get fabric right that allowed us to manifest the physical product that would align with our brand vision. And so I would say we're famous for fabrics, and I think we've institutionalized that, and that's where culture and people come into the equation. I spend a lot of time bringing talented people into our organization, aligning them behind vision, and institutionalizing our love for product. And I really do feel like that is the difference.
Just out of curiosity, when we first talked a few years ago, I learned that you didn't exactly start out as a retailer or product guy, and you've made this evolution from, you were CPA, is that right? What has that journey been like for you? And did you just fall in love with the product development process? Because you're obviously passionate about it. Obviously works really well at Vuori. Yeah,
I mean, my most important job at Vuori is I'm still our men's fit model. And a lot of people think that's insane.
I applied for that job. Somehow I didn't get it.
A lot of people think that's crazy, but I think it's one of the most important things I do every day because it keeps me intimately connected to the product. But yeah, Steve's right. I mean, I started my career I studied accounting in school. I was supposed to start my career at Ernst & Young in the fall, and I had a summer break, and I had never left the country. And so I got an opportunity to go work as a model. My friends still love to give me a hard time about that. But I went to Milan for the summer that I had off, and I worked with all these incredible brands. And then instead of returning in the fall, I spent 2 years traveling around, working for these designers. And that was the first time that I was ever around retail, or I was never ever around design and product. And that was the first time I realized maybe there's a creative in there, in addition to like my analytical brain. And so when I returned, I went to work for Ernst & Young, a big CPA firm. And I think that has served me equally as well as my product obsession on this entrepreneurial journey. But I do think that being, the men's fit model, I sit right next to design and merchandising. I go on sourcing trips. My favorite days are a day where I can just flip through fabric all day long. I'm obsessed with the tactile sensibility and the inspiration that a fabric can bring. And I think that I've surrounded myself with wildly talented people that feel the same, that share that passion for product and for textiles. And I think if the one thing that I would speak to as why we've become successful, it's not because of me as a designer, it's because we have a shared obsession over making great stuff.
Yeah, well, it seems to be working pretty well.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about your growth strategy. I'm curious, because you've been doing, obviously you're online, you've got your own stores, you've got some wholesale partners. Maybe just kind of take us through the evolution. I don't know that you necessarily think of yourself as a digitally native brand or some of the other brands that have been through this conference, I'm sure, over the last decade, but a little bit about that journey and how you think about it and how it's evolving.
Yeah, so a little fun story. First thing I did when I got my samples for our first collection is I got on a plane, I came to New York, and I wheeled a little bag around, and I got some meetings with buyers, because we were not a well-funded company. We started our business in a garage, and we raised a little bit of friends and family money. And so I got some meetings with some wholesale accounts. We never thought we were going to be a pure play D2C brand. That wasn't the strategy. The strategy was to be a multi-channel business, and we were going to embrace wholesale because the contribution from wholesale could help us fund our customer acquisition strategy over here in the e-com world. I came to New York, I got some meetings, and they looked at our product and they said, this is never going to sell in New York City. And I went home with like my tail between my legs. But today, that same buyer is still the buyer at that account, and we're the #1 performing activewear brand at that business. And so it's been an incredible journey, but the reason I share that is because our intention was to be multi-channel. But the market told us else what? It was a classic chicken or the egg kind of situation where, from we needed wholesale to help kind of fund our D2C business and build awareness, but the wholesalers wouldn't take our calls because we hadn't built a community. We didn't bring anything to the table.
Right.
And they looked at the product and they're like, we don't really know if you're trying to be a beach brand or like a sportswear brand or an activewear brand, so we don't even know where to put this on our floor. So that was its own challenge, also the opportunity. But we were almost out of business. I mean, we were literally months of cash left, and we said, okay, forget wholesale for a moment, put it on pause. We're gonna put all of our effort towards a D2C strategy. And we were able to be early. Timing is a lot of this equation as well. And we were early in advertising on Instagram and Facebook. I think Instagram started their ad platform in like late 2013, and we launched in the spring of 2015. So we were like a year into advertising on Instagram. And so we were able to build a business, and it wasn't overnight. We had to define our engine and our comms and how we spoke to the brand. But the beauty of having a direct relationship with the customers, we could learn, and you guys all know this, but we quickly learned that our initial comms around how we were speaking to our product was actually wrong. The customer loved other things about the brand. So we made adjustments on the fly, and we were able to define a little engine of growth. And then we were able to send product out to micro-influencers and build this tribe of people online who are working out in our product, and it looked different than traditional fitness brands. And all of a sudden, you could start seeing this community form online, and then those same buyers that, couldn't really see the vision, we helped them see it. And then they embraced Vuori, and we had really incredible success in wholesale, and largely because of all the digital advertising we were doing to try to sell product on our website. It was clear that customers don't really care what channel they purchase your product in. For them, it was more about convenience and where they were shopping. So if you saw a digital ad, maybe you were hesitant to convert on some, Instagram brand, but then when you walked into Nordstrom or REI or Equinox, you had more familiarity. So our sell-through was really strong, and we really built the business as a wholesale and e-commerce business.
But now you've got quite a few. I think you're on your way to 100 of your own stores. So can you talk a little bit about how that strategy has evolved and how the digital and physical pieces of that work together?
Yeah, absolutely. So retail started early for us, albeit very small. We opened our first pop-up store in 2015, the first year that we launched our business. And that's when we learned the power of providing an experience and building community around our stores. Today we have 80 stores, but we still bring with us a lot of the lessons that were learned in that early pop-up around providing value to a community and using your retail team to get outside the four walls of your store and get out into the community and build real relationships. So today, yes, we have 80 stores and growing. We'll be over 100 by the end of this year. Every store is its own little marketing engine in the communities that we serve. And so when I look forward, retail will play a huge role in our growth strategy, both here in the US as well as abroad.
Are there any things that have surprised you about, I often say digital drives physical and vice versa, at least for most companies. Is there anything you've learned in particular that surprised you about the interaction between online and maybe your wholesale partners as well?
I wouldn't say I've been surprised, but the data has definitely validated a lot of the assumptions that you would naturally think to be true, which is, a customer that originates in a store tends to be more valuable than a customer that you acquire digitally. The magic is when you can then convert that customer to become an omni-channel customer and shop both channels, then that customer is worth like 3x a single channel customer. And so that makes sense, right? You come into a store, you have a great experience, you get exposed to a much broader assortment of product, you get to try on things and touch and feel. And that experience has a longer lasting impression than interacting with digital content. In my opinion, and that's what the data has shown us to be true. And we find that we have a better chance of converting a customer to an omni-channel customer when they originate in a store. Yeah.
I think a lot of brands are, I don't know if that's surprising, but I think I've seen that with a lot of clients and whatnot. I'd like to go back a little bit to the social media strategy. You talked about how Instagram and Facebook really helped you build that back when it was perhaps a little cheaper to acquire customers that way. But you've done quite a lot with social media and just other forms of social shopping. I know Livy Dunn and some other, sometimes you show up in some of those things as well. What's the role of social media or social shopping in the brand today? How have you seen that evolving? Any real interesting lessons of the last year or two?
I think it's always been important. It's always been important to us, albeit we didn't have a big budget in those early days. And so we would work a lot with micro-influencers. As a matter of fact, the first almost year of our social feeds, it was all just UGC because we just sent product out and we got content creators and influencers wearing our product and they didn't require a lot of investment to do so. Today, that world has changed. But partnerships, especially at our level of scale, they're playing a bigger and bigger role as media becomes more competitive. I was talking to Kim, who you guys probably heard from, and she was talking about the challenges that Meta's having with all of these LLMs, clicking on ads and digesting content. We've definitely seen a challenging Meta environment, and you can almost look at a 10-year chart of the effectiveness of advertising digitally, and it's more competitive. Privacy is changing. And so you have to find ways to connect with people, and partnerships are a big part of that strategy. I think it's not a nice to have, it's a must in our world, and it's a multi-tiered system. You have partnerships at all levels of the funnel. You have your tier A, your big macro, and those could be influencers, celebrities, athletes. You have content creators and key opinion leaders, and then you have affiliates. And I think it's important to have. What's important to me is that we build a partnership engine that we can really institutionalize and make sure that we're working with the right partners, because it's not about how many followers they have. There has to be an organic connection with the brand, an authentic connection with the brand. Consumers are too smart. And so you have to work with people who naturally already love your product and then just amplify that story.
Sure. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We don't have much time left, but I'm curious from a leadership perspective, going from super entrepreneurial, ratcheting up all these different partnerships to now going to be at 100 stores, growing with these wholesale partners. The business is much more complex. As a leader, what have you learned? What has changed in that journey?
I mean, I think one of the most important things that I've learned is that vulnerability is really important. And I do not ever pretend that I understand how to run a multi-billion-dollar global business. Like that, I wasn't a professional manager. I wasn't trained in a big retailer. So I'm learning on the fly. I think it's really important that my leadership team knows that and understands that about me. And that, I think, by being vulnerable in that way, I think it sets a tone that we don't want leaders that carry big egos in our building. And I think that naturally diffuses down into every touch point, including our stores. And so, for me, it's been a constant learning. I'm learning and being stretched in new ways, and it's a beautiful gift. Nothing kind of connects you with the human spirit in the way that the entrepreneurial journey does. And so that's such a gift. But when I think about how my job has changed, some things are very different and some things are the same. I today am a very big, I spend a lot of time in recruiting. I spend a lot of time around values and ensuring that we're bringing in wildly talented people that are aligned by our vision for our company and what our priorities are, both long-term, near-term. So I spend a lot more time communicating across a big company to try to find alignment. So that's different. But the one thing that's the same is at the end of the day, like what we do can be boiled down. I mean, it's complex, global supply chains. It's very difficult, especially this year. But when you boil it down, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to make great products. So I stay obsessed on product. I stay involved, and my team can feel that passion. So that's really important. You got to take really good care of customers, and you got to tell really compelling stories, provide a really great experience, treat people well. And so I try to stay focused on the right priorities.
Well, it sounds simple, but hard to do, right? A lot of times. All right, well, we're just about out of time. One last question, and then we'll hit our takeaways. What's next for Vuori? What's on the roadmap that you're really looking forward to? Speaking product first, we're expanding the assortment. And like this fall, you're going to see a much broader range of outerwear, which is just really exciting. Being a product junkie, I'm just so excited to enter new categories while also being disciplined. Vertical retail expansion. The beauty of having built an e-com business first is we have so much data to tap into to inform how we roll out stores. And so you're going to see a lot more Vuori stores across the country. And then, we've been taking Vuori outside the U.S. We just opened our third store on Regent Street in London, which we're incredibly proud of. We opened our third store in Shanghai. And we're going to be opening our next store in China, in Beijing, later this year. And then we're expanding in Seoul as well with our first standalone store in Korea later this year. So really excited to see Vuori expand beyond our little beach town of Encinitas. Yeah, well, it's a great story. We've got our takeaways up there. In the interest of time, I won't run through them, but I'm wondering, Joe, as you look at the list, if there's anything you wanted to just double back on or something we didn't cover that you wanted to mention.
Great product. I mean, it is the differentiator. You can have great marketing, great teams, great culture, great everything. The world doesn't need more crap. Make great product.
There you go. That's the Instagram story. Yeah. The world doesn't need more crap. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, you guys. What a great way to end the event. Thank you to Joe and Steve.
Thanks for tuning in to Season 10 of the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Stay tuned for our special summer bonus series of interviews with retail industry thought leaders at the CommerceNext Growth Show in New York City, and for Season 11, launching September 2nd. If you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 2 books, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, and Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant and advisor, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.